I want to preach a message today called Help Me Process the Things Around Me. Help me process the things around me. And in the weeks to come, we're going to be talking about, man, how do I process evil in the world? How do I process doubt? How do I process despair and disappointment? But today I want to talk about help me process the things around me. We're going to be talking about political engagement, social engagement, what that looks like. If you're going to follow Jesus, it ought to look different. You ought to carry yourself in a different kind of way. And so we're going to step on all of the toes today. And I'm going to read a lot of Bible real quick, just so you don't get mad at me. I'm going to read a lot of Bible. I'm going to read Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 through, let's go 33. I'm going to read a lot of verses. I'm going to read them all right consecutively because there's a couple interactions that take place between Jesus and some religious leaders. Matthew chapter 22, verse 15, it says this. It says, then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. The him is Jesus in this case. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him, and they went away. And the same day, Sadducees came to him, who say there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. So too the second and third, down to the 7th, and after them all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? For they all had her. But Jesus answered them. First of all, this is kind of scary. Like if a woman got married 7 times and all of her husbands died, I would have other questions than whose wife will she be in the resurrection. That's just, I got a different set of questions. But Jesus answered them, You are wrong because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but they are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. Help me process the things around me. Let's pray together today with the preaching of God's word. God, I thank you so much for the honor it is to share your word, the honor it is to speak a biblical perspective over the things that are going on around us. And God, forgive us of the times, God, that maybe we haven't stewarded well this circumstance and these situations that we find ourselves in. Lord, we love you and we need you. In Jesus' name, we all said, amen. Amen. Have you ever had an interest that had such a grip on you that it was really driving the bus on all your emotions? You ever have like an interest, like I know some people, like if their favorite team loses, like they are unpleasant for like the next couple days, right? You remember, like I remember when I was growing up, like I was a big sports kid, and I cried after every time I lost through probably like 7th grade. I hated losing so much that I would lose and I would cry. I didn't know what to do with like all these emotions. I just couldn't contain myself. So I would lose and I would cry. And there was another like thing that I was into when I was really little. I used to be in, anybody else grew up, you were really into WWF before it was WWE. You know what I mean? You grew up on the OG stuff. And I remember I grew up and I was so into WWF that I would fight anybody that would tell me that it was fake. I was willing to fist fight anybody because I was not going to allow people to tell me a lie. I'm not going to allow people to tell me a lie like the WWF was. And so I was so into this, and it was driving the bus on my emotion. Like, I cared so deeply about this. And only after growing up am I able to look back and laugh at the intensity with which I gave some of these things. And what's interesting right now is there's such a unique intensity, at least since I've been alive, there's such a unique intensity in this day and age of issues around politics and culture wars, right? There's such, like, there's this unique intensity and there's this unique drive and there's this unique emotion that we're kind of finding ourselves in right now. So the question is, how did we get here? Like, how do we find ourselves in such a place? Like, I know people that you weren't even that into politics like 6 years ago, and now you are a political savant. You weren't even like that away. You didn't even really care that much if I would have asked you 7 years ago. And now it is like everything that you want to talk about. And our responses, whether you're a believer or not following Jesus, are a bit off. And I think we've lost the art of proportionality. Like our ability to keep perspective around things. Like we have all lost them. So we've all kind of lived in this space of like the worst case scenario is probably what's going to happen. Right? The worst case scenario is probably what's going to happen. And so we give ourselves, and we have lost the art of proportionality. And so there used to be this thing where it's like, okay, remember this phrase? Is this a hill worth dying on? Remember that people would ask you, maybe you were upset at something at work, or you were upset at something in school, or you were upset at something in a relationship, and somebody who was wise would give you this counsel: is this a hill worth dying on? And we live in a day and age where people think every hill is a hill worth dying on. And the reality of the matter is this: if every hill is a hill worth dying on, then no hill is a hill worth dying on. And I would argue and submit today that I believe that there are some hills that are worth dying on, but not every hill is a hill worth dying on. And so we find ourselves in this weird spot where we have no proportionality. We feel that we should be engaged, but we don't always wear it well. And so we live in kind of this space of reactionary. And what I find interesting is that reactionary living will always push you to unhealthy extremes. Right? Reactionary living will always push you to a place in which you say, man, how did I get here? And by the way, we see this in our culture, right? We see this in what's taking place. So by the way, reactionary living is how we get things like shout your abortion and January 6th. I told you guys, it's going to be a fun one today. Right? Reactionary living causes us, and it's pushing us to extremes. If you're unfamiliar, shout your abortion is this thing where people would go online and they would not just say, hey, I'm pro-abortion with some sobriety, but there was this pride and this joy and going, yay, I got an abortion. And I thought to myself when I was reading some of this stuff, I'm like, you got pushed there. In terms of not the abortion, I'm talking about in your response. Because I don't care what you believe on any topic, there are some things you should believe with some sobriety, if you believe them at all. No matter where you're at on the political spectrum of war or anti-war, even if you believe that sometimes nation has to go to war, that should be a belief that you should have with some sobriety. Right? There are some things that we should believe with some measure of lament. Even theologically, there are things that I believe with some lament. Like I believe in a real heaven and a real hell. And I'm not like, yay, hell. I believe in hell with sobriety. I believe in hell with lament. I believe in hell with some angst. And it's interesting in this political structure where both sides have been pushing on each other. And so people go in both extremes, and they do it with this awkward kind of space of going, I don't just believe this, but I believe it. And so you end up things with like shout your abortion where you're like, man, I think you got pushed. And then we end up things with like January 6th where you're like, this is crazy. You guys got played. Like you probably didn't see yourself in that space going, hey, this is what I want to give my life to. And so we find ourselves in these extremes. We find ourselves, by the way, we can't even have like real honest conversation. Can I say something really like, oh man, yeah, please don't leave our church today. I don't want to preach this, Lord. But like we end up in these places. Like, can we just acknowledge something? Like, can we acknowledge like the elephant in the room? Like, how do we end up in a spot? Now, again, I'm going to say this with some sensitivity. If you're older than 75 in our church right now, please, I love you. I'm so glad you're here. How do we end up in a place where our two options for president are like 80 years old? I don't care what you're thinking. Like, really? Like, and we can't even have honest conversations. It's like, and I love both sides because both sides are like, oh man, they say that guy says crazy things and that guy says crazy things. Right, they're 80. Right. Go hang out at the nursing home with an 80-year-old right now. You're going to be like, whoa. We get the leaders we deserve. We get the leaders we deserve. Because it's extremes pushing on each other to where we're not even rational. We can't even like say stuff like, no matter what you think, like, really? And we find ourselves just buying into this phrase right here. I just got to pick the lesser of two evils. Could you imagine like finding a spouse like that? Could you imagine taking that dating approach? Yeah, I'm talking to this girl. Who's less evil? She seems less evil. I'll go with her. Let's give it a go. And we're doing this to ourselves because we lack proportionality. We lack a grace. We lack an understanding of God. How do you want to use me in this culture and in this world? And so we go down this. Now, Jesus tells his disciples that you are to be my witness. And so we're getting caught up and we're witnesses for this cause or this person or that situation. And Jesus says, no, you're not witnesses for that. He says, you will be my witnesses. Like you belong to me. If you're a believer, Jesus would say to you, like you belong to me. My only point today is this, is that when we don't have a handle on our primary calling, we will get pulled even further away by other priorities. If we don't have a handle on what Jesus has called us to do, it is easy for us to get pulled away by other priorities. And in Matthew chapter 22, verse 15, this is so fun. It says, then the Pharisees went and they plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. And they said, teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully and you do not care about anyone's opinion. Now you can see what they're doing. They don't really believe that. And you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Christine and I, we were out in Washington State, and I was preaching for really my first pastor that I ever had. I got saved when I was 17 and started going to this church, and Roger Archer really became like my first pastor, and he's still like a pastor to me and like a father figure. I just love Roger so much, and me and Christina brought our kids out, and we we brought our kids out, and we're hanging out. We actually stayed at their house. You know, we're that close with them. Usually, if we go somewhere and speak, I don't really stay at people's houses because I'm scared. But we were like, okay, we love Roger. We'll stay at their house, and we were staying there, and our kids were there. First time our kids were ever in Washington State, and we're hanging out. And Roger has a pickleball court. He's really into pickleball, and so he has a pickleball court. And so he's like, do you want to play pickleball? Now, Roger is in his like mid-50s, and he's had hip replacement surgery, right? So he doesn't have tons of like crazy mobility. And he plays a lot of pickleball, though. And him and I start playing pickleball, and I start getting very, very frustrated because Roger is dusting me at pickleball. This man can't really move outside of like 3 feet this direction and 3 feet this direction. But he knows exactly where to hit the little wiffle ball thing, and he knows what and I'm used to playing tennis, so I'm like, I'm not hitting the ball right, and I am so frustrated. I'm like, Roger, we're playing basketball right now. My hip, I don't care. You're guarding me right now. I'm going to put you on the ground. But he got me. Like, I'd beat him probably at just about any other activity, but he got me playing like the game he could beat me at. I watched a movie the other day, and and it was called Free Guy. I don't know if you've seen this, Ryan Reynolds, and it's called Free Guy. And Ryan Reynolds' character realizes that he is like a tertiary character in a video game. Right? He realizes that okay, he's not like a main character. He's just kind of this guy that's supposed to do the same things. And this is like, he's kind of like a robot. And he realizes, oh man, I can kind of do other stuff. I can kind of break. I'm only doing this because I feel like I have to, but I can actually kind of break free and I can actually do different things. And the Pharisees come to Jesus, and they're playing games with him. And Jesus knows that they're playing games, right? He knows that they are playing him. He knows that this is not a genuine question. He knows this is not a heartfelt desire for them to really understand the deeper things of God. They come to him, and they are playing. And you and I, we have to be able to tell who is playing a game. We have to be discerning people in which we can say, hey, there's a game being played. Because if you don't realize there's a game being played, then you will continue to participate in a game you can't win. See, I could beat Roger at any other game, but he's got me playing the one game he can beat me at. And what you have to realize is, like, if you're going to follow Jesus and you're going to like walk with Jesus, the world is going to try to entangle you in its game. The patterns and systems of it is going to try to entangle you. And there's a few different players that we have to be aware of. The first players we have to be aware of are people keeping or gaining power by you playing. We got to be careful because our political order, our social order, our contextual order is such that they win when you hate the person on your right and left. And we got to at least be aware to go, okay, if I find myself hating half the people I interact with, I'm probably being played. If I find myself more angry, because after all, a life with Jesus is supposed to cause you to be a more loving and joyful person. So if I'm following Jesus, the real Jesus, and I am not becoming a more loving, joyful person, I'm being played. And some of us, it's like, man, it's like it, and we know it sometimes when we get some sobriety. By the way, we usually know it when we talk to somebody on the other side of an issue and you go, oh, these arguments are a lot more nuanced than we probably give them credit for. But you got to be careful of the players that are keeping or gaining power. This is another big one, people making money by you playing. You got to be really, really careful, right? This is why, by the way, grievance industry or a victim mentality mindset is so key. Why? Because there are a lot of people, let me just let you know a secret. There are a lot of people making a lot of money by keeping you upset. There are a lot of people making a lot of money keeping you stirred up. The other people you got to be mindful of is people that are playing the game without Jesus' priorities. There are a lot of people in the game that would want to bring their priorities and then put those priorities on you. This is why it's so important. If you're going to follow Jesus, you got to know what the priorities of Jesus are. And then you have to contend and fight to say, I'm going to keep his priorities as my priorities. And you have to be willing and secure enough to fight for that. There are things that want to entangle you, and we got to stop being so gullible. And we are being kept busy and pacified with games. By the way, religion used to foot the bill on this. Bad religion, right? What bad religion used to do is, how can I keep you busy and occupied around trying to be a better person while at the same time you not caring for the lost people, you not clothing the naked, feeding the hungry, like you not growing in your forgiveness and graciousness towards other people, you not growing in your hospitality. Bad religion used to fill this void. And so it's no wonder why now politics steps in and fills that void for us. And it says, hey, I want to pacify you. I want to keep you playing games, because if the enemy of your soul can keep you playing games, you will continue to give your life to things that are not eternal. And I don't want to give my life to things that aren't eternal. I want to give my life to the things that Jesus told me to give my life to. And then in verse 18, it says, but Jesus, aware of their malice, he said, why do you put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax. That's why Jesus is unbelievable. And they brought him a denarius, and Jesus said to him, whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said, Caesar's. And then he said to them, therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. It's always interesting when people get swept up into something, like people get swept up into some sort of like, fad or particular style or things like that. Do you guys remember, I'm going to go kind of a little old school. I don't know if there's still a thing, but do you guys remember, not purity rings, don't be confused. Not purity rings, but do you guys remember promise rings? Let me see if you remember promise rings. Remember promise rings? You remember these things? And I had a friend one time, I was in high school, and I had a couple friends give their girlfriends promise. Somebody's wearing a promise ring right now. Remember this? It was like, I don't know why, but there'd be this season where like people would give promise rings. And I don't really know what the promise was. Like, I didn't understand what the promise was. Like, hey, I'll give you a promise ring to give you another ring. This is like a for real promise. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, we already have promise rings. They're called engagement rings, bruh. Like they're called wedding rings. You know what I mean? Like we don't need a third stop. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need another one that's like a promise to a promise to a promise. You know, like we already have a couple of those, and we find ourselves getting like swept up, and we're like, man, how did I get? I'm out here giving out promise rings, and it's like it's like we're giving ourselves to something, but not really. It's like, hey, I promise, but like, hey, we'll probably break up in 6 months, and I'm gonna want my promise ring back. It's like I promise, but you're kind of starting to annoy me now, and like I hate the way you laugh, and you changed your hair. And I want out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like I promise, but not really. And we're living in a time where we're kind of just pledging ourselves almost like in this drunken state. Like, we're not really thinking about commitments we're making to other things. And we're just kind of making these commitments. You know what Jesus could have said? It's interesting. What Jesus could have said is he could have given us one of two choices. And by the way, this is like the culture of our day would have wanted Jesus to make one of these two statements. One, he could have either said, man, put all your trust in the government and they will figure it out. Give all your money to the government. Or he could have said, don't give them a dime. This place doesn't matter at all. But he doesn't. And by the way, he doesn't even go like middle ground. He does something kind of like otherworldly. And he says, no, I want you to give to God what is God's. I want you to give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Here's an interesting question. Is anyone else embarrassed by your thoughts, words, or actions over the last like 6 years? Anybody else like you've had a moment where you're like, I got caught up. I got played. I got swept up. I posted some things. I said some things. I had some thoughts. And I was like, man, I got. Anybody else you'd admit that? Let me see your hand. Anybody else? Okay, cool. Right on. The rest of you, way to go. I'm impressed. Come on, we've all had these moments. And so what we have to do is we have to come to this conclusion of going, okay, right? Because Jesus sets up the framework that begs the question. He says, I want you to give to God what is God's and give to Caesar what is Caesar's. So it begs the question, what is God's and what is Caesar's? Okay, what are the things that, and as I look back on my last 6 years, and really my whole life, I was really being like, reflective this week, thinking about this message. And I came to this conclusion. The times that I look back on and go, I was a little off there, or man, I regret that, or I'm a little embarrassed about that. You want to know, it was the same thing every time. I either gave to God something that I should have been giving to Caesar, and God's like, I don't want that, I want you. Or I gave to Caesar something that really belong to God. And I understand the confusion because a lot of us in here try to recycle. Now, I know I'm in Florida. I don't live in Washington State anymore, so less of you recycle than probably my previous audience. But there's some things, like when you're recycling, there's some things that are kind of like no-brainer. Like, because sometimes, right, the battle is, does this belong in recycling? Or does this belong in the trash? And I know some of you, you're amazed. You think Christina's preaching right now because this is the second week in a row that I've had a physical illustration. This is not my normal mode of operations. I've been keeping the creative team busy these last couple weeks. But like a carton like this, obviously it goes into the, okay, cool. Some of you are still a little confused. I'm concerned. Banana peel. Well done. This. Trash. Well done. Okay. Pretty obvious. Okay. Whatever. People eat these things. Who eats it? People really eat this stuff with peanut butter. You'd have to put something on this thing to. This goes where? Well done. Cardboard. You guys are really, really good at this. Paper plate. Plastic plate. Where? Are you sure? Styrofoam, for sure? How many of you would vote recycling? Let me see recycling. Okay. How many of you vote trash? Okay. We'll go trash. Bottle. Glass bottle. Oh. How many of you would say recycling? Oh, okay. How many of you would say trash? Well, okay, that was about a 50-50 split. Here's a toss-up. This is a toss-up. Okay, we'll put it in the recycling. Do you guys remember these? Man, I wish this would turn on. I want to know whose this is and what kind of music is on it. It's like CNC Music Factory and bands like that would be on here. That went over like 80% of the room's head. They're like, you don't even know. It takes two to make a thing go right. That's CNC Music Factory. It takes two to make it out. That's CNC Music Factory, in case you were wondering. Who would say recycling? Recycling. Okay, right on. Who would say trash? Okay, trash it is. Now, there are things that are obvious. Here's the point, right? There are things that are obvious. There are cardboard, right? There are things that are obvious. And then there are other things that are going to have to carry a little bit of attention. And there's some other things that are like, man, I'm not really sure. But what I found to be true is life is this right here. Life is this. What belongs to God? What belongs to Caesar? And let me tell you this. Jesus wasn't saying that the things that belong to Caesar aren't things that don't matter. He wasn't saying that they're evil things. He was just saying, hey, look, there are some things that are temporary that you have to do. Like, for example, like I think civic duty is a good thing. I think you should vote. But just know it's not an eternal matter. It is a temporary reality that you are participating in, and it's good that you participate in it. I think there are things like civic duty. I think we all in this room probably have social issues that we deeply care about that are important. I think things like, hey, man, how can we alleviate poverty, and how can we end racism, and how can we do these things? Those are all good things. Those are all very temporary things, because at the end of the day, that stuff really won't fall off us completely until those things die in the ground and until we're resurrected with Christ. It's not that they don't matter. It just means that proportionality matters. And it means that, hey, this is Caesar and this is God's. And when you come to God's, what you have to understand is, no, God cares about things that are eternal. He cares about your soul. He cares about your outlook. He cares about your witness. He cares about your love for people. He cares about your graciousness. He cares about your forgiveness. And you and I have to constantly do things and go, hey, I want to be proportional, and go, man, I have things that I render unto Caesar, things that, man, I want to make a contribution, kind of here in this world. And then there's other things that I go, God, but this belongs to you. And I'm not ashamed of the things that belong to God. And these things should have an obvious intensity difference. In verse 29, I want the team come up. I want to finish with this last thought. I could talk about this topic all day. But if I haven't offended you yet, then you got out unscathed. Way to go. But in Matthew 22, verse 29, right, they give him this story of like this woman that's married and her husband dies, and then she marries a brother, and then he dies and dies, and like, okay, whose wife is she going to be? And he says this. Jesus says very, very sweetly, right? But Jesus answered them, you are wrong. Because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. A few years ago, I had the amazing opportunity to sit down with, in my opinion, the greatest New Testament scholar alive right now, and his name's N.T. Wright. And I had the opportunity, I was with a group of pastors, small group of pastors, and N.T. Wright is just dropping N.T. Wright bombs all over the place, and we're kind of hanging out. It's unbelievable. I've read a bunch of N.T. Wright books. It was kind of wild to be in a room like that. And then at lunch, people just kind of start breaking away for lunch, and it ends up me and two other pastors have lunch with N.T. Wright. And again, this is like the greatest New Testament theologian in the world, right? And we're kind of talking, and these guys next to me, man, they're asking great questions. They're asking amazing questions, and N.T. Wright is, again, getting his N.T. Wright thing on, and he's going, but there was just a question. I don't know why it was the only question I could think to ask, but one thing I knew about him is that he loved golf. So one thing I knew about him is that he loved golf, and so I asked, so then it was like, the natural flow of a conversation. I guess it's my turn to talk, and I go, what's your favorite golf course? Like every conversation that these guys have been having is like, what do you think about this? And this Pauline letters when he wrote it, and they're asking all this. And I'm like, where do you like to play golf? Just curious. And he told me, and we actually had a great conversation. I was glad I asked the question. But the reason why it's silly is because I'm sitting there with the greatest living New Testament scholar, and I want to talk about golf. Now, think about this for a second. These religious leaders are interfacing with who we believe at Grace City Church to be God. They're interfacing with God, Jesus, God incarnate. And they ask him a couple questions. They want to talk about taxes and The Bachelor. They want to talk about taxes and whose wife is she going to be. Like, they're sitting down with Jesus. They could ask him anything. They could talk about anything. And the thing that they want to spend their time talking about are taxes and whose wife will she be. But I understand it. Why? Because we know that these particular religious leaders that talk to him about the second topic, they don't believe in the resurrection. And when you don't believe in the resurrection, every topic is the end of the world. When you don't believe, I think sometimes Christians have forgotten because of the way we talk right now in our political climate that, hey guys, we're going to live forever. Like, we're going to live forever. Like this stuff is going to be, I always love when people are like, oh, when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Jesus this. I'm like, no, you won't care about that. You won't care about that. You'll just be beholden to God and his glory. And that is what will consume you, and that is what you will care about. What would it look like if we got a little slice of heaven here on earth in which we said, yes, like I'm concerned about stuff, and yes, the stuff that Caesar's running matters, and yes, I pay my taxes, and yes, I take care of this stuff, but the stuff that consumes me is the stuff that matters to God. And I don't want to give my witness away, because I wanted to be right in a particular conversation. I don't want to forfeit a witness because I had some political points or some issues on some culture. It doesn't mean that we don't speak out, but can we start being thinking people? God, help me process to best minister. Not to win a political argument. Not to get people to vote how I think they should vote. But God, I'm interested in winning souls because that's what you called me to. You didn't call me to get more people registered for the Democratic Party. You didn't call me to get more people registered for the Republican Party. God, you called me to win souls. When you give your life to that, you're giving your life to eternal things. And you are rendering to God what is God's, and Caesar to Caesar. Come on, let's stand to our feet, Grace City Church.